Hello, good morning and welcome. We will be starting in 2 minutes' time. Thank you for joining early, and I hope you've got your coffee ready. We're excited to be bringing this webinar to you this morning. We'll wait just 2 minutes and we'll start the intro, and Walter can start the webinar.
I guess it's 11 start.
Yeah, super. Hi, welcome in a work from home world hosted by HeliCloud. So today's webinar will be providing the practical tips that you can apply to strengthen and enhance your communication in a work from home world that we now find ourselves in more and more. I'm delighted to introduce Walter Heck, for those of you that haven't met Walter before, CTO HeliCloud Netherlands. He'll be presenting today's session. Throughout the webinar, please do mute your audio, and we do welcome your questions at the end of the session for discussion. If you've got questions that arise during the presentation, then we encourage you to use the Q&A board, and Walter will be taking time to review and to answer and discuss all the questions posed at the end. I see we have already had some questions through, so that interaction is great. Thank you. Our webinar is being recorded. It's going to be made available to all of you together with the slides afterwards. We will keep strict to time, and that's really to allow for the questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass now to Walter to begin. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Happy to have you join me. Waleed, thank you for making me smile. I know Waleed personally, so he asked me to look not so serious. Here I am. So I'm here to talk to you today about the information and communication in a work from home world. Basically, we're kicking off this webinar series where we're doing a webinar every 2 weeks, and I wanted the first one to be accessible for tech and non-tech people alike. And when thinking about a topic, I realized that I've been working from home pretty much for a decade, so I've learned quite a lot of things in those years. And as such, I thought I'd share a bunch of these things with you today. So it's a fairly random collection of tips and tricks, but yeah, I hope you enjoy it and you find them useful and actionable for your own environments. So there are a couple of different sections. I'm first going to talk about communication and then about information management, because I think the two are quite closely related and equally important in running a proper shop in this kind of work from home forced situation. One of the most important things is to focus on asynchronous working, and this is even when you're in the office. It's really important to understand and accept that people have different things to do throughout the day, and when you have a question might not be when someone else has the time to answer it. So in order to facilitate a productive and fast pace of working environment, it's important to make sure that you are not blocked on others and others are not blocked on you. Some very simple ways in which you can do this is instead of asking if you can ask a question or saying hello first, like you would normally do in a person-to-person environment, just get along and ask your question. We can skip the pleasantries, as they say. This is age-old IRC advice, actually. If you go on old school IRC channels and you ask, hey, can I ask a question? People will get kind of annoyed at you and tell you to just ask the question instead of asking if you can ask the question. And so it's a very simple, hey, can I ask a question? And then waiting for that person to respond means that you've wasted one cycle of communication on just asking if you can ask a question. Whereas if you ask, hey, can I have some help? I have an error with this thing and it's a problem for me. Do you know what I can do? Then you've asked your question, and the next time that person has attention, which might be immediately, it might be 10 minutes later, they can see your question immediately without having to ask you, yeah, sure, you can ask the question. What's up? How can I help you? So it just increases the speed at which you can communicate. Another important thing that I always try to tell my teams is to not be blocked by asking for permission. In my teams, at least in engineering teams, and I'm generally thinking this is the same for all staff, I try to let people know that, hey, we hired you because you're smart and because we think you can do the position and the work that you're doing. So I think you can also have a good guess as to what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. So instead of asking for permission, which means that someone else needs to look at your problem before you can do something, go ahead and do it. Make a decision, run with your decision, then inform others by sending an email or a document or a chat message or whatever it is, saying, hey, I made this decision and I did this thing. Does everyone agree? In 99% of the time, you will find that everyone agrees because you're part of a team and you know what you need to be doing. So most of the time, there is not any need for a change. If there happens to be a need for a change, then that's usually 1% of the time, and you can always roll back something that has been done. Obviously, there are some exceptions to this. Major strategic decisions probably should be escalated and discussed before moving ahead. Things like external communication with your customer base, that's a good place to say, hey, maybe we should agree before we do something. But in many other things, let's say in our company, creating a quote for a customer, instead of asking for, hey, shall I put these and these things in a quote, you can make the quote and say, I made the quote, this is the information that's in it, does everyone agree? And then if somebody disagrees, they can always make the change. Focus on written communication over oral, and make notes of meetings and decisions. It's really nice to speak with people. I have about 10 video calls a day at the moment because I have to interface with a lot of different parts of the business, and I enjoy doing that. However, written communication has the advantage that it's searchable, that it's easily referable, and that you can look back later at what the flow of things was. Whereas oral communication is great for discussing something right now, but it's really hard to search through and to refer back to later. I remember we talked about this thing. It's not a great answer, and especially in larger organizations, I remember we talked about this thing is equivalent to it never happened. Whereas here's the email that I sent you that confirms this decision is a much better way to refer to something later. And it might not be that you want to show others at a later point in time, but also for yourself. What did I say about this 3 months ago? Didn't we have a discussion about this? Being able to search your chat and email and get those answers is going to be super important. Access to internal information should be open to everyone. It's also referred to as internal open source. For me, if you're looking at information management and you have information that isn't publicly available for everyone in the company, and this is internal information, right? So it's HR processes, but also sales documents, marketing collateral, that kind of stuff. If someone doesn't have access to it, they cannot search it, they cannot find it, and it might as well not exist. And to them, it doesn't exist. And this is really important to understand. As different people in your company need to interface with different other parts, they need to be able to have access to information and be able to find it by themselves without having to ask you, hey, can you tell me where I can find, I don't know, the company sales deck? This is incredibly important. When you're communicating about internal information, please do it in the open. If you have, for instance, Slack or Teams or whatever other tool, if you communicate in a public channel, even when you have a one-to-one discussion, that's the equivalent of having a discussion inside your office where you are talking to the person at the next desk, and another person who also happens to be in the room overhears you and says, oh, I actually know where this can be found, or what the answer is to this question, or I have some input into your discussion. The same thing goes for written communication. So if you're talking, if you're talking to someone, do it in a public channel. If people are not interested in your discussion with someone else, they don't need to be looking at those messages. They can just ignore them and chime in if they want to and have the time and have something sensible to say. And it really improves the cohesion and the transparency across the team. Just knowing that there is a discussion going on about some topic is great. Now I've spent next to zero effort. I've just seen a few messages fly by, and now I know that there is a discussion about this topic, instead of someone having to go and report or summarize, well, we talked about this thing and that thing happened. It's all easier to consume information. On the flip side of that, make sure that you don't expect someone to read all messages in something like Slack or Teams. Very simply put, if it is important enough that you need to know that eyeballs have seen it, send an email and ask people to respond with a confirmation that they've read it. That way, it is much more clear to you who has seen your message and who hasn't. So making an important announcement on Slack is generally a bad idea. Instead, make the announcement on email, and then on Slack say, hey, I've just sent all of you an email. Please go ahead and read it. And you can still have a discussion on Slack if that's needed, or even on the email, but you don't automatically assume that someone has read all your messages. Most of those communication tools allow you to mute a channel and only respond if your name is mentioned, and you cannot see what someone else's settings are. So while you are having a conversation, you cannot assume that someone else is seeing your conversation unless you specifically mention them. That's obviously all a suggestion. If there is a reason to keep information private, things like financial discussions, HR information, that kind of stuff is obviously going to have to stay private, and that's fine. You're an adult, and you can probably make that distinction by what needs to stay private and what shouldn't. But by making the default policy open and then closing things if they have to be, it becomes a much more better discussion, because then you have to ask yourself, should I close this information to close it off and not have it available? And in many cases, you will find that you don't actually care. Things like, let's say, a process for your engineers is irrelevant for your HR, your back office staff, for instance. However, does it hurt them to be able to see it? I don't think so. If it does, then you have a problem, because people talk about these things anyway. However, the history of Walter Heck's employment in the HR department obviously is something that has to stay private, and that's totally acceptable. A question that I've seen often, and when I speak to people about this, they say, "Oh, but how can we trust everyone to have access to everything?" Well, you trust your employees with the core of your business. So if that's there, then why is this a problem? And if that's not there, then why are we even discussing this thing? So for me, it's a non-issue. Things like compliance that requires you to lock information down, fair enough. Things like customer information, of course, is a whole different story. As a consulting company, we have a lot of information on each customer, and of course that information is locked down. But this was more about internal information, things like HR processes, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely a distinction in classes of information, and it's totally fine to require to lock down certain information and certain classes of information. That's only normal. Video calls, I find it important to dress professionally during the workday. Even depends on what your definition is of dressing professionally. I am comfortable in a work from home setting to be seen with a t-shirt on a call. This particular t-shirt, I don't know if you can see it, is from the Knowledgebase Amsterdam, which is happening next week, July 9th, and it's an online edition. So if you haven't looked at it yet, please go and sign up, because we have super cool sections. Total side show. But dressing somewhat professionally, in my opinion, is important, even when you don't have scheduled calls, because someone might actually call you, and then it's important to be able to answer without having to run around and do your hair or whatever it is that you want to do to look professional. I personally got really interested in audio, video, and lighting setups. So I've spent quite a bit of time and effort in making my setup here at home better. On the right, you can see my old setup, and on the left, my new setup. And it's a world of difference, and it just simply looks more professional to have proper lighting right in front of you, be able to look at the camera while you're speaking to a customer or a coworker. It just makes a difference. It's a small effort, and it makes a huge difference. You can easily Google for this. There are many resources online on how you can do this without a budget and make a much better impression. A piece about information management. Information should live only in one place. A good example is process information. So as an example, within HeliCloud, for instance, we have 3 geographies at the moment: Netherlands, Bulgaria, and the UK. And we have processes that are roughly the same across all of them. And so that information should only live in one place. It shouldn't be living in the place for each geography. Instead, it should live in a single place. And if you then need to link to it from other places, then you can do that. So from the Netherlands space, you can link to the general paid time off policy. That's totally fine, but don't make 3 copies of it so that when the policy changes, you have to figure out where all you stored that policy, because then you need to go and find all those places and change them. A really great example is the GitLab handbook. If you have never seen it, go ahead and after this call, go to about.gitlab.com/handbook. GitLab is a company that offers an open source product, but also runs their company in a very open source kind of way. They have a very extensive handbook outlining exactly how the company operates. And their thinking is there is nothing secret about this handbook. If you have the handbook, you cannot all of a sudden be a GitLab competitor. You can see how GitLab runs their company, and you can adopt some of these processes, but it doesn't give you the product. And similarly for HelloCloud, it's the same thing. Having access to something like our handbook doesn't actually allow you to become a premier AWS partner that services large enterprises. You have to actually build the same company around it, and a handbook is a tiny piece of that puzzle. Ability to make and suggest changes should be open by default. So when you're looking at something like Confluence or some wiki or whatever else the information management system is that you're using, it should by default be possible for anyone across the business to make a change anywhere they want to. It's the Wikipedia principle. Instead of having to go and ask the author of the Netherlands article to make a fix a typo in his page, or add another link to something that happened here, I don't know, I can just go ahead and do it. There are audit logs, there's a version history, so if my change is not acceptable, it could easily be rolled back. And that works really well in keeping larger amounts of information up to date, because when you write information, it starts a life cycle, and it has a tendency to exist for a much longer time than you would like it to across your business and across time. If something shouldn't be changeable for a specific reason, of course, that's fine. If you're in doubt whether it should be changeable or not, ask yourself what is the worst possible thing that could happen. Can we roll back to change? Is it possible to get a notification when someone makes a change to a certain page or a certain piece of information? Are there legal implications? Those kind of things are the questions that could qualify something for locking it down, but by default it should be open. And it's simply a matter of attention span. If I'm looking at something and I want to make a change, I see a problem, I can either right then and there click edit, make the change, and be done with it, or I can go and how to say that? Put in a ticket to get permission to edit this page, and by the time I get it, we're 2 hours down the line, and I'm no longer interested in contributing to this policy change or whatever it is that I wanted to change. It's a really important thing to keep things going faster and more smoothly. Same thing goes for channels or teams in Teams, Slack, Chime, RocketJet, Mattermost, whatever the hell it is that you're using, IRC. If in general, all teams and channels should be public by default, except for things like management or internal HR for the HR staff to communicate together. Of course, those are an exception, but in general, even customer teams should be public if they can be. A team is not a place to share confidential information, so in general, it should be chit-chat and people discussing things in a channel. And for me to be able to say, oh, I have a question for marketing, I'll just go and join the marketing channel and give my input there, is much more easy than when I have a marketing question, I have to ask permission to be able to join the marketing channel, because it's actually a private channel. And here also the principle exists that if it's not public, it doesn't exist. So I don't know that there is let's say a sales channel if nobody's ever shared it. If it's a private channel, there's no way I can see it. And so I don't know that it exists, and it just counters transparency across the business. Notifications, tweak notifications for different things. So some channels and teams will be super relevant for you. Others are things that you want to have a peripheral view on, and another section will be channels that you want to drop in every once in a while, but you don't really want to ever be bothered by anyone posting information in there. And you can adjust your how to say that, your notification settings according to what you need there. Lastly, emails, also highly underestimated how you can be more productive in emails. When you're sending an email to someone and you making a list of things, make sure to use a numbered list instead of a bullet list. I see many people using stars or minuses or whatever it is to make a list. If you number it, then somebody else can say, hey, regarding point 2, this is my answer. That makes a much more easy conversation than when you have to say, regarding this thing where you said X, Y, and Z, I think A, B, and C. A personal pet peeve is things like Outlook will by default send emails in RTF format, and that allows you to choose a non-standard font. Please stay away from this. This is not MySpace. You don't need to make your emails look beautiful or colored or whatever. When you choose non-standard fonts or non-standard colors, it becomes really difficult for readers that are on the other side of your email for them to properly see and read the email. So it's just annoying across the board. If you're responding to an email, use a reply to all. If you have people in your address in the address list that shouldn't be included forward, move them to BCC for a last email and mention at the top of your reply, hey, I moved this person to BCC. That way they get one, that message will be the last one they get, because the next time someone presses reply all, that person is not no longer in there, and it's a great way to make people aware that they're being exited from a conversation that they have no specific interest in. Lastly, try to be mindful about responding late at night or in the weekend. I see lots of people with this work from home situation working at crazy times of the day or weekends. Especially when you're in a management position, be careful sending out emails or questions late at night or on the weekend, because you are setting expectations even if you don't mean to set expectations. So I usually ask myself, does this message need to be sent now, or can it wait until Monday? If it can wait until Monday, I just queue it up in my drafts and send it out on Monday, simply because then I'm not bothering people with work in their weekends, and that's in my opinion a mindful thing to do. Something like Confluence, Wiki, or Knowledgebase, whatever tool you're using, information that is alive, so to speak, should live in those knowledge bases so that they can easily be updated. File shares, Office 365, Google Drive, those kind of OneDrive, whatever you want to use, are really difficult places to make information live, because you put information in a document there and it kind of disappears into a void, because no one can ever find that information unless they specifically know which documents to open. Whereas in Knowledgebase, everything is flat text with some images if you wanted to, and it's much easier to have a proper I'd say that search and history of things. Also here, permissions should be open for everyone everywhere, except for places where it has to be locked down. And this has everything to do with making the barrier for changes as low as possible. I talked about it a little bit before as well. When people make changes, there's an audit log and version history, so it's easy to go back to a previous version. And the last one, I guess I talked about it already, write once, refer everywhere, instead of write many times, because that becomes really difficult if you need to make a change and have to go and find everywhere where you wrote a specific thing. SharePoint is my personal pet peeve, so it's getting its own slide. I was looking at how much I dislike SharePoint, and then I decided to search for a meme image, and as you can see, the internet is literally drowning in memes of people that hate SharePoint. If you're using it and you are happy with it, please let me know and tell me how you managed to become happy with it, because for me it's an eternal pit of despair and things that just disappear in there and never come out. So that was actually the last point. That was what I had to share. Hopefully you can still see my face on the webcam. I am very happy to have your questions if you have them. I'll give you a minute to write the questions in the question box, or you can put up your hand, and I can give you the mic so you can actually speak your question.
Thank you, Walter. I have unmuted everybody so they have audio permission. And yeah, thanks. There were some really interesting pieces on there, things that are new to me, but also reminders. We can easily slip into old habits, and really great reminders there, especially around the email communication. So thank you. We've got some comments in the question box there, generally around being rather unhappy with SharePoint.
Yeah, it's SharePoint. I see it everywhere. I'm struggling to see what a better solution is also. So that's always important when you say you don't like something. You should probably have a suggestion for something better. And as some of you may know, until last year, we were a separate company in the Netherlands, and that we joined HeliCloud as an acquisition in August. And so we had to switch to SharePoint, and I hadn't worked with SharePoint since 2005, I guess, and I forgot how much I hated it. And now every day we're using it, and it's not a great experience at all. But at the same time, it's also really difficult to find a knowledge or file sharing setup that is actually productive and working and searchable as well is very important part. So yeah, I share your pain, Walid. Okay, I don't see anyone raise their hands, and I don't see any other questions. Oh, yeah, sorry. I see one more comment from Walid. Yeah, it's good to every once in a while refresh these kind of ideas, and hopefully a lot of these were open doors and things you already knew, because that's a good indication that you were on the right track. Walid is asking, how do you deal with the overwhelming data and how to search for effective and updated data? This is really a problem. I think that that's why my session was both on communication and information management. And for information, I think it's really important to understand and remember that information behaves very much like water. It wants to be open and free, and it goes where you don't think it could go. So even if you have a policy or salaries or whatever, you think it should be private because it's private. People talk about their salaries. People talk about the policies in different places. So guarding that and making it hidden for others across the company is probably going to create more issues for you than it will solve. And with large amounts of data in large companies, I'm really a big fan of knowledge bases like a wiki or not SharePoint, of course, a wiki or a Confluence. And it doesn't even matter which tool. It matters that the information is properly organized. And I really recommend you to look at the GitLab handbook, because that contains information for every single department in the company, and it starts with a good main page that allows for people to click through easily. It's basically a menu that allows people to click through to the right department and the section that they want to know, and then be very verbose with your communication. That really helps. And really understand that information that lives in a Word document, in a share, in a file share, and it doesn't really matter if it's how to say that, SharePoint or some other solution. It's really hard to search through, and it's really hard to refer to and keep up to date over time. So I'd really recommend against doing that. Those file shares are for storing information that is final and ready. So for instance, you can store quotes to customers there. That's a piece of information. Once it's made, it needs to be kept for historical purposes, but it's not going to change. And information that is alive, so to speak, should live in a place where it can be allowed to be alive.
Super. Okay, thank you, Walter. And thank you for presenting today's session. Everybody on the webinar, please know that all of the slides, the recording will be made available. We'll add it to our YouTube channel. So we encourage you to go along to the HeliCloud YouTube channel and also find other content that we have recorded in the past few months. Hopefully there'll be some more things of interest for you there.